When you think of Buddhist practice, what comes to mind? Many of us think of meditative calm and insight and letting go of things. But what about joy? Did you know that joy is actually a critical element of the path to enlightenment? In this video, we'll discuss the role of joy in Buddhist practice, why it is essential on our journey towards enlightenment, what the Buddha had to say about it, and how we can apply these kinds of understandings of the role of joy to our own daily practice. First, I think it's important to give a slight digression or housekeeping point that there are various words in the early Buddhist language of Pali that can be translated as joy. Words like pamoja or piti or sukha, all of these are words that are somewhat related. Sukha sometimes means happiness, for example. These are related terms that signify different aspects of we might call a joyful mindset. In some suttas it's said that pamoja is a precondition for piti, and that piti is an example of what we might term rapture, a rapturous state. That may be a little bit overstated, but these are states that are related to one another in various ways. And in today's video, I'm going to be a little bit fuzzy and basically discuss all of them in the same kind of umbrella as joyful states. Now, the dictionary definition of joy is basically a mind state of great pleasure and happiness, where we're joyful. And that's what we're trying to search for in the discussion that I'm having in this video. Second, let's turn to perhaps the central wellspring of joy in Buddhist practice, which is found in meditation itself, in formal meditation. One central teaching on joy involves the 7 factors of enlightenment or awakening. In this teaching, joy occurs in the 4th spot, after mindfulness, investigation, and energy, and before tranquility. The idea being that we sit down, let's say in formal meditation, and we take a mindful attitude towards what's going on. Then the mind becomes curious and starts investigating. This investigation brings energy to our practice. We become interested. We become curious. Our curiosity deepens. And with that deepening curiosity, joy arises. Perhaps it arises simply from the curiosity itself. Or perhaps it arises because we're beginning to understand and see things that we hadn't seen before. So the mind is becoming inspired by this kind of wholesome investigation. In this sense, joy is not some useless feature along the path, but is an essential feature of these steps towards enlightenment. It's a sign of our progress that creates and sustains momentum in our practice. Another key teaching on joy in early Buddhism involves the jhanas, these states of deep meditative absorption. Joy is associated with the 1st and 2nd jhanas in particular. In both of them you have this, what is called piti, as well as sukha, which is sometimes translated as bliss or happiness. And again, both of these can be understood in one way or another as kinds of joy. And so, as our progress deepens in these jhanas, from the 1st to the 2nd, we begin with a kind of a livelier, more sort of bubbling sort of joy, we might say, that then matures into a deeper and more profound and calmer sort of joy in the 2nd jhana. In Buddhist meditation practice, these kinds of joy and happiness are often seen as skillful counterbalances to the kind of intensity needed to make progress in insight into the features of reality. There is a method of practice in Buddhism known as dry insight, where people attempt to gain insight without reference or without the use of these jhanas, without the use or approach that involves this kind of joy and happiness. And while some do find this an effective method, for many it is simply too austere a practice. And I think many people, and certainly in the understanding of early Buddhism, the practice is uplifted with the kind of joy that is found in these kinds of jhana experiences. Although we have to keep in mind that there is a kind of a joy involved in insight as well that I'll turn to in a bit. The problem is that these deep states do take a lot of time to gain and to master, and most of us, particularly living ordinary lives, simply don't have the time and energy to put towards the achievement of these kinds of states. And on that note, I think we should then turn to aspects of joy in Buddhist practice that are more of a daily practice kind of nature, the sorts of joy that we can engage in and touch, even if we're ordinary lay people living ordinary lives. And perhaps the first of these involves generosity. The Buddha, when he would discuss ethics, indeed when he would discuss the Dharma in general with lay people, he would almost always begin with a discussion of generosity and the importance of it to our practice. In one early sutta, the Buddha talks about how a good person is generous. And there are various aspects of this generosity that the good person engages in, but the last of these is that their generosity makes them happy. It gives them a sense of satisfaction and goodwill. And the Buddha says that if they are generous in this way, they should expect a happy future. Now, it's important to keep in mind here that you do not have to be wealthy in order to practice generosity. Helping out a friend, volunteering, or even just giving a smile or a kind word to somebody in need can be a form of generosity that is helpful and indeed brings joy to ourselves and others. We can also gain joy from ethical living, from living an ethical life. In one early sutta, the Buddha is discussing ethics and ethical practice with his son Rahula. He talks to his son Rahula about the fact that if Rahula does something wrong, something that's not right, that he should confess it to a friend, a spiritual friend or advisor or teacher, so that he can get over it and move past it. However, if on the other hand, he says, while checking in this way, you know, this act with the body that I have done doesn't lead to hurting myself, hurting others, or hurting both, it's skillful with happiness as its outcome and result, then, Rahula, you should live in rapture and joy because of this, training day and night in skillful qualities. And this rapture and joy, the Pali words here are piti and pamoja. This idea being here that living an ethical life relieves us of the burden of regrets. It supports our ideals of ourself as an ethical person, as a good person. It creates an inner peace that maintains our self-respect. And as a result, joy arises from such practice. Now, these cases of generosity and of ethical living demonstrate that joy does not require us to indulge in deep kinds of meditative absorption like the jhanas in order to gain joy in Buddhist practice. Rather, we can gain it in our everyday lives as well. Most importantly, perhaps, we can gain joy also from insights into the realities of life. And this is the kind of joy that can arise through insight. So, for example, we may have a favorite glass, and one day it slips from our hands, falls on the floor, and breaks into 1,000,000 pieces. This could be an example, a case where we become sad or distraught because we've lost something. However, if we're able to look on that experience with a mind of insight, seeing it perhaps as an example of the first noble truth that life is unsatisfactory in this way, that there's nothing to hold on to in that way, to conditioned things, if we understand it as an example of the impermanence of all reality, then we can perhaps learn from it and come to a joyful understanding. That is to say, we can turn a bad experience into a joyful one by framing it properly and understanding it properly. If we can let go of our identification with and attachment to things, let's say posters, books, knickknacks, stuff that gets burned in a fire, as I experienced. a couple years ago, then a weight can be lifted off our shoulders. And we can indeed, even in a bad experience like that, experience a measure of joy as well. Fourth, let's consider some ways that joy can actually help support and deepen our practice. One example of this is that joy can be a great counteraction or counteracting force to apathy, to dullness and drowsiness. If we're getting bored with our practice, perhaps we should try to investigate ways to find joy in it instead. We should practice, after all, because it does bring us occasional feelings of freedom and of joy. And when those do arise, we should celebrate them. We shouldn't let them pass as just another thing, but we should look at it. We should try to celebrate it, try to understand it, try to see what kinds of events bring that kind of joy to mind. Joy can also be an antidote to a kind of doubt about our practice. So, for example, if we're doubting whether we're on the right path or practicing in the right way, it's the freedom and joy that we can find that gives us confidence that we're on the right path. An example of this is found in the Buddha's own experience. Before he became enlightened, when he was basically lost and wandering around, trying to find the right practices, the right ways forward for himself, when he was full of doubts and uncertainties, it was this memory that he had of joy, of a joyful moment when he was in jhana, in a state of meditative absorption as a child, that brought him back, that made him realize that the problem that he was trying to attack in his practice was not one of joy itself, was not one of pleasure itself, but was something different, and that he could maintain a practice of joy and a certain kind of deep meditative pleasure, and it would continue to keep him on that right path. Fifth, in conclusion, joy is critical to Buddhist practice. Now, there are many different aspects of joy in that practice, and many different words that are used to express a kind of a joyful mind state, as I've already said. But the basic point is clear, that when we practice, we should practice with a mind to trying to engage that kind of feeling of joy as we practice. Joy lightens our burdens and brings a calm positivity to our outlook on life. In the modern world, we tend nowadays to identify or equate joy with possessions, material possessions, with worldly gains, with status and things like that. But in Buddhism, joy has quite a different source. Joy comes from simplicity. It comes from equanimity. It comes from calm contentment, from kindness and from compassion, not from chasing external rewards. So my question for you is, what brings joy to your practice, and how can you help to cultivate more of it in your life? If you want to hear more about the ways that Buddhist practice helps cultivate happiness in general, I did a video about that a while back, and I'll leave a link to it up here on the screen. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, take a look at my Patreon page. It's linked up here or down below in the notes, and see if you want to help support the channel and the work that I'm doing. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video. And meanwhile, all of you, be well.